Hey everyone, David Elderswald with a solution for Power BI's challenge within Workout Wednesday for week 15. This week, can you create a bivariate choropleth map in Power BI? And the first requirement is actually to read up on what is a bivariate choropleth map within Power BI. And you can see here, I have a color scale that I lifted from the article that had a few sample color palettes that may work well. And all we're trying to do with bivariate is encode two variables within the same range of colors or the same color palette. And you can see here I have 83 counties within the state of Michigan, and I'm trying to encode from a color perspective these different bins of values for how many people percent-wise have completed college and what percentage of people within those counties are living in poverty. And you can see there's just been from low to high for each of those. And then within the table here, you get the exact value or the exact percentage for what those values or variables are. So I'm going to flip over to try to rebuild this from scratch. We'll see how successful it is. But it's a very complex challenge if you look at it, because there's a lot of things going on. So certain things may not be uh, that difficult to do on their own. But kind of when put together, it ended up being a lengthier challenge with a lot going on for some people. But what we see here in the requirements is just some data prep that we need to do. So I'm going to go out in a second to data.world and get the two data sets for the two different variables, merge them together, and then we have a set of basic cleanup and transformation steps. And then we'll get into how we create those bins for low, medium, and high for each of those variables. And then we'll create a measure that combines them so that we end up with those 9 different options for the colors that we see within the bivariate spectrum there. And then finally, we'll put that as a choropleth map within the ArcGIS maps for Power BI. And this is a map that Esri had built for Power BI and maintained for Power BI. Esri makes a lot of great GIS products, and this is something that just at the free tier here within Power BI, it's great because there's a lot of good functionality built in there. What we're doing today could be done in other maps within Power BI, but not every map within Power BI. So if you're used to other products that just may have a map, Power BI has more than a dozen maps when you look at the out-of-box visuals and custom visuals. And it's a different world for some people where one of those options is ArcGIS maps, and it's a great one. I really love it. So I'm going to flip over to Power BI with a new file here, and I've got my data.world connector queued up. Connect, and if you don't have a data.world login, you would need one. The owner of the data set is DataVeld, and I'm just going to go back here and make sure that I have the actual data set ID copied in, which is this WOW 2021 15 here. So I'll paste this in, hit OK, and I do need both of these. And instead of loading the data, I want to transform the data. So I check the boxes, I hit transform data, and that will bring up my Power Query editor. And the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to right click on each of these queries and disable the load. So I uncheck this box, and they'll be italicized now, and that's just my visual indicator that that's not going to end up in the final data model. And what I want to do now is I want to join these together. And one of the data prep gotchas that I have here is that county is it includes the state abbreviation for this variable, but it does not include state abbreviation for this one. On the ArcGIS map, because I'm not dealing with latitude and longitude, I do want to have this geocoded properly. And so the state abbreviation county column here will give me the most reliable geocoding. So I do want to make sure that I include this one. Other gotchas in this data set, things like the decimal places between 0 and 1, but between 0 and 100 for this one, and we'll account for that in a second. But to just start out, I want to join these together, and the common field that I see between these two queries is this FIPS code. So I'll start here with percent college completion, and I'll go up to the ribbon, select merge queries as new. That will give me a third query, and then I'll select the two original queries here, and then I'll click the FIPS column to join on FIPS. And because it's static data, I don't need to worry too much about whether it's a left out or inner join. It's always going to find that match. It's just curated on Michigan County here, but I get the match on 83 rows. And I'm going to quickly rename this as Bivariate, which is the query name, which will become the table name that I had in the original solution, original example file. And then there's a lot that I don't need in terms of columns that I'll clear out here in a minute. But I'm going to just quickly rename this one to college completion, because that will impact my usability later on. So I'm going to eventually remove some of these older columns. I only wanted the one from 2019, and then I'm going to expand out this poverty column using this button in the top right corner. And all that I care about here is percent in poverty. And I'll uncheck this box for the prefix, hit OK, and now I've got percent in poverty. I'm going to actually do some transformation of this data so that the decimal places are consistent between the two variables. Not required, but just from my peace of mind, I'm going to just divide this by 100. But I'm going to show you a cool way to do it. So, if I wanted to come in and add a new column, I could add a custom column and just divide it by 100. That's all it's doing. But I also want to showcase some functionality here in this column from examples, where an alternative way to do it would be using this column from examples, and you could just feed it selections. So I can come in here and say 0.18, and you can see here that it didn't quite get what I was going for. So it's got 0.1 to 0.6, not meaningful in what I'm trying to do here. But I can keep feeding it these examples until it kind of gets it right. And eventually it says, oh, yes, you're trying to just fill this in. And it's got some artificial intelligence built into it. So the more examples you feed it, the more reliable it will be. And you can see I got kind of what I was going for after two examples. Uh, Quick and easy way would just be divide by 100, obviously. But this is something where, as you get into Power BI, there are many, many more uses for this columns from examples functionality. So look for opportunities to do that if you just need some data cleanup and you just want to feed it a few examples. And I'll leave it at that. But it's a pretty cool functionality within Power Query here. So what I'm going to do now is rename this to In Poverty. And then I need to change the data type to decimal number. So I'll do that here. And at this point, I've got my in poverty column, my college completion column, and I need county. And those are the three required ones. I'm going to quickly rename this. And then I did bring FIPS code into my final example, but it wouldn't be required for mapping. But just for consistency with the stuff I have going on with my other example file, I'm going to control click and select these four columns. And then I right click and I choose remove other columns. So that's going to remove all the columns besides those four that I won't want to load into my final data model here. So a pretty simple data model when it comes down to it, but there was some data prep trickery that went into what we needed to do to get here. So I'm going to hit close and apply. That will load this data in, and then we can get into the binning functionality. And within here, I've got these values for college completion and in poverty. And Power BI has this function called groups, or this feature called groups, where if I hover over a certain field, I can select new group, and it defaults to size of bins. Because it's numeric, it gives me the bin option right away. If it were a text field, it would give me a list. But this is, once again, one of those features where there are a lot of different uses for it. And because I have uh, a very static data set, I can come in here and maybe take some liberties where I know it's going to be static. I always want 3 bins, and it gives me this bin size by default. And I'm just going to leave it as the default. So if you're new to Power BI and you're just getting exposed to this functionality, I do want to make this part as simple as possible. If you need to get into dynamic binning and things like that, that can be somewhat more of a challenge within Power BI. But there's this nice out-of-the-box grouping functionality that gets me some pretty standard bins, and uh, we'll call it good for today. I do want to make sure that my bin counts are only 3, so that I've got that low, medium, and high tier. So instead of the default of 9, switch that to 3. But now I've got bins for both of my variables. And just to show you what that looks like, I'm going to flip over to the data tab or data view. And you can see for each of these counties, here's the column that has the value, but then here's the column that has the bins. And you can see that if I wanted to get very precise or uh, you know look at how that is binned, it's got a lot of decimal places there. So if I wanted to change some formatting just to ensure that I reduce those decimal places when I'm looking at the bins, I can go above and beyond and do that too. That's not going to impact my final visual, so it's just more of your preference there. But you can see if I maybe sort by one of these columns, I've got bins for column completion that correspond to the low, the medium, the high. So 3 of them, and then same thing here with poverty, low, medium, and high. And they're not evenly split. So that's one thing to point out. If you're looking for just 83 counties and you just get the even split of each of counties within those bins, that's not what that's doing here. This is just saying within the numeric range for each of these variables, where is this going to fall? So the range is split, but not um, the number of observations within each of those variables. So I'm going to get into the measure creation here, but I'm going to cheat a little bit. I'm just going to copy and paste from my existing solution just to make my life easier. But the measure is what's going to ultimately show up within my ArcGIS visual. And I'm just going to flip over to my solution. And this is one way to do it. This was my first attempt where I came in and I said I needed to just look at all of the different ranges and basically combine the two. And this is not the clean way to do it. So you'll see I use a switch function, and that will give me that check of the different conditions to say if this condition that follows is true, uh, and then feed it a number of different conditions. And because I'm trying to build out the 9 different options here, I have 9 different conditions that it could fall under. And I totally cheated here and hard coded because I knew it was a static data set. So if you wanted to go above and beyond and adapt this for more dynamic data, you could look at ranges, min max, percentiles, and so on and so forth. But for a challenge that was already very complex, I just hard coded these values. So forgive me there. But one of the things that I'm doing is basically saying if the bin value is less than a certain amount and it's less than a certain amount for this other bin, this other variable, then consider that, in this case, the description low and low. And then you're just kind of building out this series of conditions where you've got low, medium, low, high, medium, low, so on and so forth, and just going down through those 9 different conditions. This has a lot of the selected values, which is just kind of looking at the current context of whatever that row happens to be for that bin. And it's just kind of copy and paste, like my first attempt to get in there and do it. I have a second measure that reduces that complexity, at least visually reduces it a bit. And this uses variables. And if I were thinking, I would have just done this right off the bat. But my variables here just give me that selected value once to say what's the current context of college, poverty, and then I can just plug those variables in, and it reduces my visual load and the visual complexity of this switch statement here that gets returned. So if you use variables within Power BI, this should be a good selling point for you. I did not go back and change the other measure here, but this measure has the descriptions that eventually will be on my tooltip. So I can hover over the map and I can see this within the tooltip as high poverty, low completed college. And the only thing that I would need for the ArcGIS map is this measure here. And if I don't have access to the ArcGIS map and I wanted to get into the field map, here's where I would need that color measure. So the field map works with conditional formatting. And so what I need to do is feed it these hex color codes to be able to show the different values within the map. And one of the things that I pulled out of the article was this color palette that had the hex colors in it, and I just incorporated that into my Power BI measure here. But you can see here, if I flip back over to the ArcGIS map that I'm mostly concerned about, I now want to encode this visually onto a map. And so to do this, what I'll do is just create a new page, add a new ArcGIS map visual, and I'm going to add my county as the location. And you can see because I had established the geocoding as county, comma Michigan, or MI for the Michigan abbreviation, ArcGIS was able to easily associate and geocode this as Michigan. If I had not had that state abbreviation, it may have found other county names within other states that may have matched, and it could be a little bit messier. Within my categories, I'll now take this bivariate description and I'll add this to my color shelf. And what you'll notice right off the bat is it didn't incorporate the colors. And that's because it doesn't have the context of those colors yet. So just by contrast, one of the things that I could have done if I had used the field map within Power BI is something similar, where I drag in the county for location, and then there's no color shelf here. So what do? In the formatting here, this is actually, if you've got this color measure, this is actually easier. So I can come in here to data colors, and there's this f of x for expression-based formatting, conditional formatting, and I can choose a field value and say I want the colors to be based on this bivariate colors, which give me the hex codes. And boom, my map's done. With ArcGIS, it's not quite as easy. But oh, and then I could drag in, the tooltip and just make my description show up and so on and so forth within this tooltip. So that actually is an easier map to do. There's no dynamic way to get these colors within the ArcGIS map. So what I had to do is I have the map established, and then within formatting, there's a number of different options, but I can format within my layer list here. I can hover over and get the layer options. And there's this layer option for symbology. And this is kind of the last major requirement here. But you can see here the map theme is set to color. And then if I scroll all the way down, there are these color ramps. And there's no established color ramp that's going to give me exactly what I want for each of these variables. So what I'd have to do is unfortunately manually color code these. So it doesn't have, at least to my knowledge, the nice conditional formatting that I can get when it comes to color. But there's a lot of other value within this ArcGIS Maps visual that I do get that I wouldn't necessarily have in other visuals within Power BI. So It's really just a matter of coming in, and I'm not going to get into the exact color codes here and do all nine, but you've got the option to come in here and manually color code some hex colors, and you just kind of go down and manually do that 9 times. So once again, works pretty well with a static data set, just to kind of showcase some of the functionality. If this were a more dynamic data set, I might have taken some time to change the approach a little bit, but for Workout Wednesday challenge, that gets you exposure to bivariate maps, gets you exposure to the groups functionality, the switch measure that we've seen in past challenges, and then introduces some cool stuff with the ArcGIS maps. Hopefully that's enough going on for many of you for this week. So thank you for your time.